met a potential serial killer in his home for work. This is a long one, bear with me. 2 years ago, I was working for a company as a person who measures houses. Most people haven't heard of it. It's where you essentially have an iPad and you go to people's homes and draw up floor plans and measure rooms for carpet/hardwood flooring projects. Anyone can request one. I was a 25-year-old female at the time, one of the few females that work this position. I was actually really good at the job, so they gave me a lot of work, and I usually hit between 10 to 14 houses a day, driving all over multiple towns. This house was my last house of the day, in the middle of nowhere, and I was exhausted. When I got there, I was incredibly annoyed because the customer wasn't home and was late for his appointment. 10 minutes later, he pulls up next to my car. He was a middle-aged man, balding, wearing a normal office job attire with a tie and everything. He seemed a bit awkward, but was apologetic and let me into his home. Upon entering, the house was unbelievably spotless and organized. Minimal furniture and smelled like cleaning supplies. It didn't strike me as odd at first. He had 2 cats lounging in the living room. He first started acting weird as I was directed to the first bedroom. He mentioned, "Wow, my cats love you." They don't take to strangers like this usually, but his cats literally didn't move or come near me the whole time. I just nodded and smiled while I got to work scaling out the master bedroom on my iPad. He started inquiring about the electronics I was using. "Do they keep track of where you are on that thing?" Immediate red flag. "Yes, and my boss knows how long each job should take based on the scope of work. It's incredible technology." I lied without missing a beat. He agreed it was amazing. "Be careful, don't touch the gun on the nightstand, it might go off," he chuckled. Talk about immediate spine chill. I looked up from my iPad and sure enough, there was a handgun on the nightstand. I knew instantly that I needed to behave like nothing that was happening was triggering alarms for me. He directed me to the second bedroom, and he said the exact same thing, warning me of a gun on the nightstand that indeed was there. This was the moment I knew I was in danger. At first I thought it was just my anxiety around guns, but at this point the tension building between us was undeniable. There were only 2 bedrooms on the scope of work. I hastily met up with him in the kitchen and began running down the next steps, but he interrupted me. "Could you measure the basement stairs? I forgot to add them to the list, and I think I might want to carpet them in the future." My heart dropped, but my stupid customer service conditioned brain could not figure out how to get away with saying no. He led me to the basement door, and you guys, there is no way he was planning on doing anything with these stairs. They were plank wooden stairs, L-shaped, going down, leading to an unfinished basement. Unfortunately, in order to get an accurate measure, I had to walk all the way down them to the basement. Meanwhile, he stood blocking the doorway with a smile on his face, mentioning again about whether or not my boss knew where I was, to which I shortly replied, "Yes." Once I got to the basement, I scanned the room quickly. There was not 1, but 7 deep freezers lining the walls. In the middle of the room was a lit, low-hanging ceiling light, revealing an old television set, VHS tapes scattered on the floor, and an old recliner facing the TV. Behind the set, 2 white shelves full of VHS tapes. In this moment, I knew one of 2 things was going to happen. He was either going to let me go, or he was going to push me down the stairs. I held my breath, put a smile on my face in an attempt to act my way out of the situation, and began to climb the stairs. All I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears. He was still blocking the door, no smile this time. As I got to about the 5th stair from the top, I felt him hesitate, which made me hesitate as well. You could cut the tension with a knife, and I finally understood that expression. To my absolute shock and relief, after 4 seconds, he stepped aside. I made a beeline towards the front door, not saying a word when he stopped me again, saying, "Oh, before you go, won't you give my cats a treat? They loved you so much. He was holding a bag of cat treats. I quickly gave his cats a treat, thanked him, and practically ran out of the house, and definitely ran to my car. The second I got out of his driveway, I had the most intense panic attack and cried. I tried to call my boss, but I was in a dead zone. The truth of the matter is that my boss would not have noticed I was missing for at least 24 hours when I didn't route my day the next workday. Yes, he would have eventually been caught as it was my last known location, but I would have been long dead. I suffered PTSD over this experience. I couldn't sleep for a week. I was petrified to work my job, but had no choice. This day still haunts me. The worst part, I was so effed up, jumbled, and in denial over the experience, I forgot to write down his address. This happened quite a long time ago, yet it is never too far from my mind. We continue to feel very lucky to have survived whatever might have happened. Read and tell me what you think. It was a long time ago, before cell phones were prevalent, and I was a mom in my early 30s who had just driven our kids to the pediatrician. The Macon, Georgia doctor's office was an hour away from our home, and I was just taking the two youngest of my three, then ages 1 and 3 years old, to our scheduled appointments. Because we lived so far away, their office always gave us the last 2 appointments of the day, and we were grateful. The doctor had just built a new building off of a fresh spur of the highway, so the location was quite isolated in every direction, but a very nice facility compared to his old spot by the hospital there. His new building was also pretty far back on the new lot, and my car, which was a black Jeep Cherokee we had owned for 2 years, was one of only 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot when arrived. I parked near the front door, removed the kids from their car seats, and for the next hour or so we waited, then saw the doctor, paid, and finally exited back outside. Mine was the only car left in the lot, as I loaded the children in their car seats for our trip home. But as the receptionist locked the front glass doors, my car somehow wouldn't start when I turned the key. There was just an odd clicking noise. Gathering the children once again, I knocked on the door until someone allowed us back in, and asked to borrow their phone to call a nearby garage for service. I found one in the phone book, and the man said that he would come, but that it might be a bit. So I told him my location, left to go back out to the car, rolled down all the windows, and loaded the children back into their seats once more as we waited. Soon we watched as all the lights were turned out in the building again, and everyone left, their cars departing, one by one, from behind the building somewhere, leaving us now completely alone in the parking lot. As it was still light, I spent a lot of time trying to tend to the children, digging through our car for snacks and a bottle, making sure that they weren't getting too hot, etc. Although the service station attendant said that it was probably going to be quite a while, I was pleasantly surprised when a truck pulled into the empty parking lot pretty soon, and a man got out of his pickup, smiled and nodded to me, and said he was going to raise the hood. He was middle-aged and a bit scruffy, but quite frankly, many gas station attendants sometimes looked that way, especially at the end of the day, and I was grateful when he began doing something under the hood almost immediately. I sat down again in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me to try the engine, but he seemed to be taking a long time checking the connections, and I longed for him to just grab jumper cables. Yet, he never did. Without getting out of the car, I asked him what he thought was wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's just a loose wire, not the battery," and continued with whatever he was doing. I couldn't see his face at all from where I was sitting, but his hands were slightly visible through that long horizontal slit between the windshield and the raised hood as we waited. More than once, he said that it was merely a loose wire, and if I would just come up here really quick, he would show me which one it was, so it would never happen again. I remember kind of smiling and shaking my head, saying that sadly there was no reason to show me anything, as I didn't know anything about cars. I just thanked him and continued to stay in the driver's seat. Again, just waiting for the inevitable signal to try to start the ignition that was most surely coming any moment. At one point, I remember thinking that he was definitely flirting as he spoke, but I was trying above all to be polite and kind, as he was indeed helping us. We were hot and tired and miserable, and truthfully, I was distracted with the kids. Oddly enough, he was starting to sound a little frustrated with me because I wouldn't come up and look at the engine. I remember thinking that I certainly didn't want to make him mad, where he left us all there alone with the sun sinking so quickly. And then the strangest thing happened. Another truck suddenly pulled into that desolate parking lot, and as it did, the nice guy working underneath my hood suddenly slammed it shut, ran to his truck, started it, and drove away very quickly, without even saying a word of goodbye. I was both confused and a little anxious when he did this, because I didn't know who was now arriving. I even remember feeling a little frightened that he had suddenly left me there alone with two little ones, defenseless. Why wouldn't he at least stay and speak to whoever was parking next to me now? It certainly seemed the southernly gentleman thing to do. I looked around and was very aware once again that there were no visible cars on the road, no homes or businesses nearby, and the sun was continuing to set quickly. As this new, also unmarked pickup pulled in next to me, I got out of the car once again, this time more apprehensively. Upon exiting though, he immediately introduced himself, and his name and voice seemed to match who I had spoken to on the phone much earlier. He then actually called me by name, apologized for being so late, and finally smiled instead towards the road pointing, and asking who the man was that had just left so suddenly. Relieved and unfazed, I just smiled back in surprise and told him, "Well, I don't know, I thought all this time that he was you." And we both laughed slightly as he then grabbed jumper cables, walked to the front of my car, raised the hood, and started to work. I immediately sat back in the driver's seat once more, suddenly grateful that, with luck, that air conditioner would be blowing full blast shortly, and once again checking the children. While listening for the familiar words, "try it," I had my back completely turned towards the children when he surprised me by suddenly coming to the driver's side door. In the strangest voice he said, "Ma'am, is this yours?" And when I looked into his hands, he was holding a long, thin, dagger-like looking device that was about 1.5 feet in length. It appeared to be very old and covered with rust, yet on one end it had a tiny circular small finger holes, as if it was a mix of a long thin sword and scissors, oddly combined. I remember being amazed but not frightened, and I asked where he had found them. "Under the hood," he replied. I said, just matter-of-factly, that I had never seen them before, but how weird was it that those things had somehow been stuck and undiscovered in my car for all those years, and shook my head in surprise. He continued to stand there and stare at them, unbelievingly, and he looked oddly pale too, like he couldn't find the words to speak for a bit, just continuing to stare at the unusual object. Honestly, I didn't care one bit about it. All I could think of was getting the car going, letting me pay him and the cost, and leaving. He didn't say anything else, just quickly set them on the curb, started his truck, and then signaled for me to start the Jeep. And when it immediately caught, my 3-year-old cheered. Grateful, I quickly turned on the air conditioner full blast, rolled up all the windows, aimed the air vents back towards the back seat, and reached for my purse to pay out. I stood up and took a few steps to meet him so I could hear the amount now owed. With both of our vehicles running, he came back around to my driver's side, but instead of handing me the bill, irritated me a bit by walking right past me and picking up that weird object once more. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I want you to look at these one more time," and held them out for closer inspection. This time, I moved a bit closer and actually really looked. In his hands, the item still appeared incredibly large, possessing an almost bayonet-looking quality, except for the strangely small 2 loops on one end. I had never seen anything like it, and told him so. As he held it, he spoke quietly and slowly to me, as if trying desperately to make me understand something that was somehow still going over my head. "These weren't hidden somewhere in the engine, ma'am. They hadn't been there very long at all. because they were sitting right on top. They must have just been put there. I shook my head no and half smiled as I said, but they're obviously very old and rusty, to which he pointed more closely and replied, yeah, but see how sharp they are. These look like they've just been sharpened. And when I looked down, he was right. The long, skinny, dagger-looking like shape was unusual, but by far the oddest quality was just how sharp it appeared to be. The edges at the tip, where the rust had been removed, were gleaming silver. As I paid him, his final words to me were, "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm really glad I pulled up when I did." He quietly thanked me when taking the payment, told me that I probably needed to call the police when I got home, and then asked me where I wanted the item. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to take it at all, but I released the back window so he could place it inside. We both then left the lot together, him turning one way, me turning the other towards the small winding highway that would lead home, still an hour away. I did indeed contact the Macon police the moment that we arrived home, and I got the children inside safely. But although they listened politely, they declined when I offered to bring the scissor-like thing to them later. The officer I spoke to said that they sounded as if they were specialized surgical shears from my description and measurements on the phone, which I found quite disturbing, as you can imagine. I remember wondering how he would even know that and why he would say that. I had tried so carefully not to touch any of the surfaces, hoping that they might be able to lift prints or test it for blood if they wanted, but the story seemed to bore him a bit and he didn't really seem interested. His attitude insinuated that, as there was no longer an emergency, it was of no importance now. At the very end of the call, as if to wind things up, he did say that it sounded as if I was very lucky, and that I might want to keep the shears for a few days, just in case someone from his office got back with me later. But that was all. I wrapped them carefully in newspaper and placed them in the brick storage unit behind our house, and there they remained for several more years, untouched, until we moved away and I finally, not wanting to bring them across several states, reluctantly threw them in the trash. Around that time though, if you look through old news reports, women were going missing all over Georgia. Some bodies were eventually found, but others remain missing to this very day. I've often wondered what would have happened if the service station attendant hadn't arrived when he did, if my children would still have a mother, if I would still have a son and my daughter, if I would have missed all these years with them. I guess I'll never know, but I learned something very important about myself that day. I had always felt that I was pretty aware of my surroundings, pretty good at reading people and staying safe, but because I was exhausted and tired and hot and stranded in a different city, my common sense and intelligence simply left me for a bit and wasn't working at that time. And many of my friends and family still think that our car trouble that day and my lack of awareness could easily have cost us our lives. Woman always hides from me in the laundry room of our apartment building. What is going on with her? I live in an apartment complex that has a shared laundry room in the basement. You get to the basement through a door from the stairwell. On the other side, there's a hallway with cellar compartments on one side. On the other side, there's the laundry room. The hallway is where I first saw the woman about 3 years ago when I moved there. I went to do my laundry one day, and when I stepped into the hallway and waited for the light to come on, I saw a dark figure with long hair slipping into one of the door frames for a split second. I felt like my blood froze, but told myself that I only imagined her from already feeling creeped out. I told my boyfriend about it later that night, and a few weeks later, he said he'd seen her too. From then on, I saw her every now and then. The encounters were creepy, but I kind of came to expect them and ignored her, figuring that to be the polite and empathetic response, so to speak, since she didn't want to be seen. I suspected her to have some sort of phobia. Sometimes I'd see her in the hallway, and sometimes she'd already be inside the laundry room, quickly getting behind a wall when I entered. Then I'd hear her leave quietly while I was leaning over my washing machine, even leaving her things behind. Sometimes I wasn't sure if I was alone down there, figuring that she'd surely sometimes hide successfully. One time she crouched behind a washer, waiting for me to leave. I took that as her getting more comfortable with me. That was the creepiest encounter, until one night I found a key in the garage. I wanted to post a note about it at the main entrance of the building, and did so on my side. I wanted to post another one at the entrance of the other building that shares the garage. You can get there through the basement, which is also shared. When I entered the hallway, I saw her on the other end, but she quickly closed the door as always, disappearing back into the stairwell of the other building. I was already feeling uneasy, but still walked towards the door, the note in my hand. When I entered the stairwell of the other building and the lights came on slowly, I didn't see her, so I thought she'd gone back inside her apartment or something. I left the door open, thinking I'd go back in a minute. I went up one set of stairs towards the entrance, and as the stairs made a turn, I looked back down and saw her standing there all of a sudden, inside the hallway I just came out of, in complete darkness. She stood behind the door, and had closed it just enough so I could see her face. She stared at me through dark sunglasses, a blank expression on her face, and didn't pull back at all this time, didn't even flinch. She must have stood behind the door on the other side as I went through it, and then quickly gotten inside right behind me. We must have been so close to each other for a few seconds. It's the longest I've ever had the chance to look at her. I'm not proud of it, but I panicked and ran up the remaining stairs and out of the building. I had to walk to my entrance in the rain, wearing only slippers. Since that day, I'm not so sure about her not wanting to be noticed anymore. I kind of feel like if that were the case, it wouldn't happen all the time, right? She'd hear someone coming and already hide or leave, instead of waiting for them to come in and see her for a moment. She also didn't need to watch me at all. She could have shut the door behind her. I mean, she's completely harmless obviously, but I don't get her, and I can't help but feel vaguely threatened by her. I feel bad about it, but all the crouching, sneaking, hiding, waiting and watching now has a predatory feel to it. Do not let your Uber driver cancel your ride while in the car. Sorry, this is a bit long. I know this isn't a therapist office, but this has bothered me for a long time, and I wanted to get it off my chest. This happened in June of 2018 in Portland, Oregon. I understand I acted like an idiot in the situation. Since then, I've become much more observant, cautious, and honestly much more paranoid. I went dancing with friends, was really drunk by midnight. Unfortunately, this was back when I had little money, and I realized you could save money by eating very little before going out, and it would take far fewer drinks to get drunk. So I was so drunk, I barely remember my friend ordering me an Uber home. My phone was dead, of course. I can vaguely recall them helping me into the car and telling me to get home safe. I don't remember greeting the driver or the first minute or so, but soon after getting in, he asked how my night was and if I smoked. Honestly, I was just thinking about bed at this point, so I sort of just slurred out that I did sometimes. He then offered me a joint, and this is the first moment I get sort of nervous and begin paying attention. I tell him something like I'm really tired and just ready to get home. I think he said something about it being an indica-based joint and it made for great sleep. Once again, I say something not exactly like no, but not a yes, which he takes as a yes, I'll take that joint now. Once again, I'm still drunk enough I can barely see straight or speak clearly. So when he says, okay, well, I have to cancel the ride really quick because I can't give it to you while I'm on the clock, or something to that effect, it takes me a second to realize how dangerous that is. And by the time I start to say something, he has cancelled the ride and pulls over. We were in an area just east of the Hawthorne Bridge, and it was totally secluded. Some empty parking lots, a closed auto body shop, no one in sight. It's starting to hit me now. I'm in the car, not with an Uber driver, but with some stranger. I can't call anyone, and he's trying to give me weed that could have anything in it. For the next minute or so, we're pretty quiet, or I just can't remember any small talk he tried to make because I was beginning to panic. And every time he handed me the joint, I would take fake hits, just breathing it into my mouth and not into my lungs. I felt tired, clumsy, and weak. That kind of drunk where you're almost at the point of nausea, and I knew I couldn't do much of anything to defend myself. I remember vividly being fixated for a moment on the fact that I didn't even have a pair of keys to defend myself, as my building used fobs for just about everything, and I didn't take my mail key with me. As I'm freaking out, I look up to see if this guy is sort of noticing, and I make eye contact with him in the mirror. He was staring at me, but I couldn't read his expression. Finally, he says something along the lines of, "Well, let's get out of here." I tell him I'll just call another Uber to get home, thinking at this point it might even be safer to walk. And he says, "No, I still have your address, I'll just take you home." For a moment I was relieved. I guess I wanted to believe him so badly that I would get home safe, that I believed him. I tried to calm myself down, thinking he hadn't actually done anything threatening. Maybe he was just your typical stoner guy and I'm overreacting. At this time, I lived on PSU campus in downtown Portland, in the southwest area of the city. He's driving me north on the east side of the river. There are several bridges to our left, and as he keeps moving north, he has several opportunities to take an exit, to hop over the river and get me back downtown. He keeps skipping them. We keep passing bridge after bridge that could get me home. Up in northeast Portland, there are some large industrial areas that can get very isolated at night, and Portland in general is surrounded by lots of forests, so I knew he could have me in a secluded area really quickly. After he passes like the fourth exit for a bridge, pretty sure it was the Broadway Bridge, I've been racking my brain for a way to make him actually take me home, and say something to the effect of, "Hey, my boyfriend is waiting for me at home," which was true, though I said it in a very meek way. The driver says nothing, but he did take the next exit for a bridge and basically hung a giant U-turn that started taking me home. Even as we're on the west side of town heading south, I'm still shaking and have my hand on the door handle, thinking about just hopping out at a red light the closer we get to my apartment. My phone is completely dead, and he honestly still has several chances to hop onto a nearby highway and speed out of the city. We're getting pretty close to my apartment now, and I'm once again trying to convince myself I'm being paranoid about some stoner that can't navigate the city. Although a few minutes before this, I was so scared I was crying. So once we get about 2 blocks from my apartment, I lie and tell him it's easiest to stop here and he can let me out. Again, he doesn't say anything, but he does slow down. As he's slowing down the car, I'm flooded with relief and even feel myself smile. But when I go to open the door, it's locked. I try to lift the lock mechanism manually, but it won't budge. I look up at him instinctually to see what's up, and he's got his head turned almost fully towards me, shoulders still facing the road, smiling at me. The worst fucking smile I've ever seen. It looked so mocking, and it just did not reach his eyes at all. I just started crying and asking him to open the door. I was so freaked out and still very drunk, and thank God he did. I will never forget the sensation of vulnerability, not just being drunk in his car with no way to contact anyone, but even as I got out of the car, I kept feeling like he would somehow grab the back of my shirt and pull me back in, as silly as that sounds. When I got home, I found out my boyfriend had actually gone out with friends last minute and wasn't even home. He wouldn't even have known till much later if I hadn't gone back safe. The next day, I convinced myself I was freaking out over nothing, which I realized could still be the case. But in my guts, I had truly felt in danger that night before. Technically, this guy could have been totally harmless, but I still think I should have texted my friend and had her report him. The big thing that made me think of this was recently hearing about how Ed Kemper would go for practice runs, picking up hitchhikers and seeing if he could get the passengers and potential victims to trust him, or how far out of his comfort zone he could push them without them saying anything. Obviously, this guy wasn't Ed Kemper, but I hate wondering if that night was a practice run of sorts for my Uber driver. Thanks to whoever reads this whole thing, I'm at a point in my life where I'm realizing how much danger I put myself in when I was younger, and just depressed as hell, and it has made me both surprised and deeply grateful I'm still here. Thank you so much for all the kind responses and advice. This event and a lot of others from when I partied a bit too much really haunted me the last few years, and your responses have been wildly affirming. Bless you guys. This just happened out late with my dog. I just had this strange encounter. I took my dog to pee past midnight. It's late for a woman to be out, I know, but I think my dog gives me a false sense of security sometimes. Also, usually there are 1 to 2 dog owners out even past midnight, but tonight there wasn't. I was in a courtyard area between multiple buildings, as my dog was finding a spot to pee. This guy passes by in the pathway close to one of the buildings to my left. I just look at him, and maybe I look too hard or something, because I can come off kind of creepy when I stare, because sometimes I disassociate, especially if I'm tired. He started looking behind him and like stalling, like he's waiting for something. He walks back a bit, walks a little bit forward, just stalling and looking down and back, and my assumption is he has an off-leash dog he's waiting for. I can't really see because there are bushes. I notice when he stares at my dog peeing. As he's doing this, a security guard in bright yellow walks in the pathway close to the building right on the other side of me. And the guy just walks off. I didn't see any dog with him. I think he's gone. For some reason, I'm not really registering this as a threat. I really don't know why. A part of me thought maybe I scared him by staring at him. So my dog pees and poos pretty quickly, and as I'm walking back, that guy had crossed to another building, and he's close to the back door of that building, hiding behind a pillar. Just standing there, stoically watching me behind the pillar. He makes no movements, just stares. A somewhat narrow road is separating us. No one else is around, no cars. So I walk to the opposite side and cross the street there instead. And as I'm on the other sidewalk, opposite the sidewalk he is on, I look where I saw him in case he darts at me, and he's still there, staring me down from behind the pillar. His body isn't turned, it's just his head, and he's just watching me. I rush home. 0 words exchanged, no gesturing, nothing. He didn't look homeless at all. He had on a nice black tracksuit, looking brand new. He didn't seem obviously mentally ill in any way. Also, it was odd because I was calm the entire time. I don't know if I can report this, as there was no interaction. It was night, so I couldn't make out any real features, other than he was white, wearing a black tracksuit, and was staring at me. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to hit like. And if you'd like to see more of this content in future, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you have any creepy stories you'd like to share with me, please don't hesitate to do it in the comments down below. I love reading them. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you next week.